The church smelled of lilies and polished wood, the kind of scent that should have carried dignity, but instead felt suffocating. I sat in the front row, staring at the coffin draped in white flowers, telling myself to breathe, to focus on the quiet rhythm of the organ. My father was gone. That truth alone should have filled the day, but in my family, peace was always temporary. A fragile thread stretched thin by old rivalries and unspoken resentments. Even grief could not disguise it. I glanced around the pew's black coats, veils, faces tilted downward in forced solemnity. Cousins who hadn't called in years sat stiffly, whispering behind gloved hands. My aunts dabbed at eyes with tissues, their tears as rehearsed as everything else about them. For a moment I tried to remember my father as he was before illness. His booming laugh, the smell of tobacco on his jackets, the way he always pressed coins into my palm when I was a little girl. "Don't tell your mother," he'd wink. That memory warmed me for a heartbeat until my uncle shifted beside me, Uncle Victor. He had always been a shadow at the edge of family gatherings, smiling just enough to keep people uneasy. His suit was sharper than anyone else's, his tie too bright for the occasion, a slash of red against the black sea. I felt his presence long before he leaned closer, his cologne cutting through the smell of lilies. "You know," he murmured, voice soft enough that at first I thought I imagined it, "your father left something behind, but not for you." The words slipped into my ear like poison, and I froze. My head snapped toward him, but he was already leaning back, eyes fixed on the coffin as if he hadn't spoken at all. For a moment, I convinced myself grief was making me hallucinate. But then I heard it. The rustle of bodies shifting, the sudden hitch of someone's breath. A ripple ran through the room like a gust of wind sweeping across tall grass. "What did he say?" A cousin whispered too loudly. Another voice answered. "He said something about the will." Chairs creaked. My aunt's head jerked toward me, her mascara-streaked eyes narrowing as though I had orchestrated this. Murmurs multiplied, low and sharp, words like inheritance, money, and secret darting through the air. The organ's gentle hymn suddenly seemed mocking, a fragile attempt to drown out the rising noise. I wanted to shrink into the wooden pew, to let the floor open up and swallow me whole. My father's coffin, his final moment of dignity, was no longer the center. Instead, every gaze landed on me, piercing, suspicious, hungry. I had spent years caring for him, nursing him through illness, paying bills he could no longer face, and now, here in the house of God, I was being treated as though I had something to hide. Uncle Victor sat unmoved, lips curved in the faintest smirk. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a scene, just one whisper, and the funeral turned into a theater of scandal. I tried to remember my father's face, the man he was, but all I saw was the coffin, and all I felt was the humiliation rising in my chest. It burned hotter than grief. My throat tightened, my palms slick against each other. This was supposed to be closure, a farewell. Instead, it was the beginning of something else, something darker. I lowered my gaze, staring at the floor tiles patterned like a chessboard, and realized my father's death hadn't ended the games. It had only reset the board, and in that moment, I knew. Truths don't stay buried with the dead. They rise, sharp and jagged, and tear through the living. What my uncle whispered was just the first move. The war had begun. When people talk about devotion, they usually imagine soft things, flowers at a bedside, whispered prayers, gentle touches, but the truth is, devotion is bills piling up in stacks, dishes left cold on the table, and the relentless weight of exhaustion that nobody else sees. That was my reality in the years before my father died. It began slowly, the way illness always does. A cough that lingered, a shuffle in his step, a doctor's frown he tried to brush off with a joke. Before I knew it, I was rearranging my entire life, leaving work early, canceling vacations, saying no to opportunities that might have carried me forward. My friends stopped inviting me out because I always had the same answer. "I can't. My father needs me." I still remember those nights. Sitting by his hospital bed, the beeping machines punctuating the silence, his hand limp in mine. Sometimes he would wake and smile faintly, as if surprised I was there. "You shouldn't wear yourself out," he'd murmur. But who else would? My uncle certainly didn't appear. Neither did my cousins. They sent fruit baskets and sympathy cards. But sympathy never once paid the electricity bill or cleaned up after a sick man. I managed his debts too, though no one knew. My father had always been proud, a man who hated asking for help. But by then the bills were drowning him. I sold my jewelry, emptied my savings, and whispered to myself that one day it would be worth it, that at the very least, my loyalty would mean something. Meanwhile, Uncle Victor lived like royalty. He showed up at birthdays with expensive bottles of wine. Boasting of his vacations in Tuscany and his important connections, he loved to play the part of the sophisticated patriarch without ever carrying the burden. Whenever he dropped by the hospital, it was only for a brief, dramatic appearance, just long enough to be seen to ensure people remembered his face at the center of the story, and I became invisible. My sacrifices weren't glamorous, so nobody spoke of them. They weren't public gestures, so nobody clapped. After the funeral whisper, those years of invisibility began to suffocate me. The memory of every small sacrifice pressed down harder because I realized how little it seemed to matter. Worse still, my cousins turned their suspicions on me. If you were so close to him, one of them sneered over coffee the next day, why didn't he trust you with the will? I choked on my drink, not from the liquid but from the cruelty. Their eyes narrowed as if I'd been hiding something, hoarding some secret treasure. In their minds, devotion equaled possession, and possession meant guilt. But even I couldn't ignore the strange memories that resurfaced. My father hurriedly locking drawers in his desk when I entered the room, the hushed phone calls in the middle of the night, his voice low and urgent, the envelopes he sometimes slipped into his coat pocket before heading out, refusing to tell me where he was going. I told myself back then it was pride, his way of holding on to control, even as his health slipped away. But now, after Victor's poisonous whisper, I wondered, had I been blind? One night I tore through the study. Drawers yanked open, papers scattered across the floor, my heart pounding. I found letters with dates that didn't match, photographs of people I didn't recognize, even receipts from bank withdrawals I couldn't explain. Every piece felt like a fragment of a puzzle designed to mock me. And through it all, I could hear my cousins' voices echoing. If you were so close, why didn't he trust you? The humiliation stung sharper than grief. I had given up my life for him, and yet I wasn't the keeper of his truth. That's when I realized my uncle knew something. He held the missing piece. Whether it was a will, a letter, or some other document my father had entrusted to him. And if Victor had that power, then his whisper wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. The ledger of my sacrifices had left me in debt. Not of money, but of dignity. And Victor was about to collect. Would you like me to carry the tension forward in section 3, 450 to 600 words? With the first confrontation and refusal? Or should we stay a little longer in the paranoia and secrecy? Section 3, vindication at last 600 words. I found him in the study after the service. The same room where my father used to keep his books and his secrets. Uncle Victor stood by the window, sipping whiskey like a man savoring victory. For a moment, I simply watched him. The glass glinting in his hand, the smug curl of his lips. He didn't look like someone in mourning. He looked like someone waiting for the next act of a play he had written himself. You enjoyed yourself today, didn't you? I said, my voice low but steady. He didn't turn. I simply told the truth. I stepped closer, the years of swallowed resentment boiling up. No. You whispered poison to turn grief into a circus. Whatever you think you're holding over me, it ends now. Tell me what you know. Finally, he faced me. His eyes gleamed, sharp as knives. Your father wrote another will. One you weren't meant to see. You think you were his angel? But maybe he didn't trust you after all. The words were designed to cut, but I didn't flinch this time. Show it to me, his smile faltered. That was the first crack, and I pressed harder. You carry yourself like the keeper of his legacy. But I see you, Victor. You're terrified of being irrelevant. That's why you stir chaos. You'd rather be feared than forgotten. For a moment, silence hung between us, so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. Then he laughed softly. Careful, niece. You're starting to sound like him. When we emerged from the study, the family was already gathered in the living room. Voices raised, accusations flying. My cousins demanded explanations. My aunts cried betrayal. And still, every eye turned toward me as though I were the criminal. I raised my voice above the chaos. Enough. The room stilled. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. You all saw me by his side. You all knew I sacrificed everything while the rest of you lived comfortably. And yet, you question whether he valued me. Let me tell you what he said the last night I sat by his bed. He held my hand and whispered, "You carried me farther than I deserved. I only hope I can leave you something worthy of your devotion." Tears burned, but I didn't let them fall. I looked straight at Victor. That's the truth. Not your whispers, not your venom. My father's own words. As if summoned by that declaration, the door opened and the lawyer entered with a sealed envelope. All eyes shifted to him as he unfolded the paper, his voice clear and final. The second will existed. My father had left the modest house, a small savings account. And, most importantly, his war medals and journals to me alone. The room erupted, but this time I didn't shrink. I stood taller, breathing deeply as the noise washed over me. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about recognition. About not being invisible. About knowing my father saw me, even in his final days. Victor's face hardened, his power crumbling with every word. The lawyer read aloud. He had twisted the truth, but the truth had a way of surfacing. Just like the past at that funeral, I looked around the room at the glares. The bitterness, the unwillingness to admit fault hand for the first time. I didn't feel humiliated. I felt free because love cannot be measured in money, but respect must be earned and defended. My father had left me both, in his own way. And to those listening now, I ask you, what would you have done if a family member humiliated you at a funeral? If you want more stories of family secrets, betrayals, and lessons hard won, subscribe and join me for the next chapter.